First of all, thank you guys for being here, and good morning. The first thing I want to do is just let everyone know that as a board member, we have some things, some information that I want to give. And one of the key things is the voting bill, Senate Bill 202, some key provisions in that bill that will affect not only us on the board, but also the citizens of Chatham County. And so I just want to make some of those, clear up some myths and make sure that the citizens are educated on what it is that will be affecting them. Another thing I want to do is educate citizens on some things that we did on a couple of weeks ago. We voted on some new polling places, so we want to make sure that we let citizens know as early as possible what those polling places are now. And that's the first thing I want to do right now. Precincts 302, Temple Mikvik, Israel, will serve as the voting location, with Rows of Sharing as the backup location. Rows of Sharing, it was the polling place for that area, now will be the Temple. It's a very, very valuable to have a backup location. Precinct 608, Christ Memorial Baptist Church, will serve as the voting location. They served as the emergency poll last year. Savannah Commons was that area, or was that polling place, and it now will serve as the backup. Precinct 706, First Baptist Church of Pooler, will serve as the voting location. They served as the emergency poll last year. It was formerly the City Hall or the courthouse in Pooler. Precinct 712 will be West Chatham Baptist Church, will serve as the voting location. The previous poll location is no longer available, so that's why that change happened. Precinct 816, the Oaks, will return as the voting location, with the Mighty 8th Air Force or Mighty 8th Museum as the backup location. We appreciated the Mighty 8th providing a valuable service to voters last year. Also, we will always speak to organizations and agencies who would consider being a voting location. So we want to let everyone know that we're still looking and we want to partner with others, organizations and groups that may have a building that they may want to utilize. I know that we're looking at making ILA Local 1414 Longshoreman Hall a polling place. So organizations like that have buildings that feel that we should look at, we're looking at. We are also currently in need of a polling location in the Little Neck Road area of the county. Again, we are looking for a polling location in the Little Neck Road area of the county. Moving forward to some of the voting changes. Among complaints about the 2020 election has how long it took for some counties to release their final vote totals, how others missed batches of ballots the first time, and general confusion about how the process is not over on the election night. A change we will have on the local level will embrace is a section that allows us to begin processing but not tabulating absentee ballots starting 2 weeks before the election. There's extra incentive to do so by way of a new requirement that counties count all the ballots nonstop as soon as polls close and finish by 5 p.m. the next day or potentially face investigation. To clarify that, the state has interpreted that rule as meaning we will count all the ballots that we have at that moment. Again, we are one of maybe 2 or 3 counties that have a separate Board of Elections and Board of Registrars. And so currently, the Board of Registrars handles early ballots, early voting, and things of that nature. They send over those ballots for us to tabulate and to get done. The interpretation by the state of that new rule is that we will count the ballots that we have that night, and if the Board of Registrars is still counting their ballots or doing their thing with early ballots, then our staff can go home. We do not have to count 24/7, so all night, all day. I want to also make note that when you do that, you can have mistakes because you have fatigue, you have employees getting fatigued, you have now shifts that have to be made over and over again for employees, and so that is a good thing to a certain degree. Local officials are required to post and report the total number of ballots cast on Election Day. During early voting, via absentee voting and provisional ballots, all by 10 o'clock p.m. on election night. essentially providing the public with a denominator to understand the total possible votes out there as results trickle in. Ultimately, on election night, we are now required to post our numbers of what we have by 10 p.m. We can no longer wait till 10:01 or 11 o'clock in order to post those numbers. So voters can be assured by election night, on election night, you will have numbers and you will have some form of idea of how many votes were cast that day on election day and early voting and things of that nature. All those ballots will have to be at least counted by 10 p.m. that night. Now, of course, understand there are still times, days after that, and I will get to that in a new minute. We have a new deadline for that as well. But there are still times after that that we're still counting ballots, such as those Yukava ballots from overseas, military, and maybe those early voting ballots that came in that day of election day that came in up until 7 p.m. that day. Speaking of provisional ballots, out-of-precinct provisional ballots will not count anymore unless cast after 5 p.m. and a voter signs a statement saying they could not make it to their home precinct in time. Now, poll managers have always, this is coming from our staff, poll managers have always encouraged voters who are in the wrong precinct to go to the correct one. In fact, we have told them to do so. Occasionally, we will have a voter who, for various reasons, say they cannot. In other words, for example, you may have someone in Wilmington Island who came to a poll in Wilmington Island, but their actual poll is in Pooler. As rare as that may sound, because you're on the opposite end of the county, it does happen. And many times those individuals cannot make it to their actual poll. And so they will sign an affidavit or sign a piece of paper at a statement at that polling location at the island so that their ballot is still counted. Poll managers will like this. Those voters will not be happy. We understand that because they probably won't be able to do that any longer. Now that counties must finish tabulating all by 5 p.m. the day after the election, lawmakers moved up their election certification deadline to 6 days after polls close instead of 10. So whereas we had 10 days, election officials on the state level had 10 days to certify the election, they've now moved that to 6 days, which means we have to finish tabulating all of our ballots and things by 5 p.m. the following day after election. So we used to have that Friday, usually that Friday, after election day, to count all ballots and things like that. Now we have till 5 p.m. the next day. I'm going to also go line by line on just a few key issues from the bill. Let me also preface this by saying I am a Democratic member of the board elected by Democrats in this county. However, this press conference is not a partisan press conference, it's an educational press conference. I want to make sure that citizens understand what laws are in place. As a board member, I do not have the ability to change that law as it stands, but I do have the ability to at least educate our citizens on what is out there now, what has been passed, so that they can be aware of what's going on. The first thing I want to talk about, which is a hot button topic, is the crime that you will be charged with for volunteers or groups to hand water or snacks to voters in line. And that is on line 1873 through 1875 of the bill. On lines 1887 through 1889, it makes it a crime for voters in line to accept water or snacks from a volunteer or group. The bill was later amended to allow an unattended reciprocal near line. In other words, if someone's near the line, they cannot do it either. Creates lines 979 through 981. It creates a new misdemeanor for handling a completed application for anyone not authorized by law to assist a voter. Let me clarify that. Last year and subsequent years before, I had questions from voters who asked, well, can I, they're not the voter's caregiver, they're not any of that. They just want to go pick up 10 ballots from, let's say, Savannah State, or they wanted to pick up 20 ballots from a nursing home. If that person is not legally authorized to do that, in other words, being a caregiver or being an authorized person at that nursing home or at that location, then they can be charged with a misdemeanor if doing so. Adds a line 2460, so 2460 in the bill, adds a new misdemeanor for photographing your own absentee ballot or someone else's. Next is another big topic, which is a board takeover. Lines 270 through 281 does authorize the state's election board to replace an entire county board of elections with a single individual. This has been a hot topic, especially here in Chatham County, because we are the only board in the entire state that's elected. From my staff perspective, and let me also preface this, we are still, our staff and the board itself is still dissecting this bill to get more understanding of it. But for the ones I'm telling you, I actually do have understanding of those. But for this bill, for this particular line in the bill, it is difficult to say whether or not we can truly be taken over here in Chatham County as it states. I think we will need a statement or some legal opinion from the Attorney General to give some legal cause as to whether or not they can simply, the State Elections Board can simply take over an elected board such as ours, because we are elected officials, and ultimately in normal proceedings, in order to get rid of an elected board before their term is up, you would have to place that on a referendum on the ballot for citizens to vote whether or not they want to get rid of that entity or not. Usually, legislation will have within it a date certain that will say this will take an effect after this term of these elected officials. This bill does not specifically address that, partly because we are the only county that it would actually affect in any way. And so I will personally be asking for a definite opinion from our county attorney and hopefully from our Attorney General as well. However, as it stands, they can come in, the State Elections Board can take over our board if it deems so, along with the Board of Registrars. Now, it also prohibits on line 357 to 360, and I'm skimming, and I'm not going through every line here, but it prohibits counties from using their budget to pay for their defense in a takeover proceeding. So the county cannot use county funds in order to protect itself in terms of if there's a proceeding happening, we can't use our own funds to do that, which is going to make it difficult to, I don't understand how we're going to be able to do that without using our funds. And it also requires counties, line 514 through 516 and 533 through 535, requires counties pay any expenses incurred by performance review boards, by the Performance Review Board. Some of the bill I will not digest because it is not in the Board of Elections purview, it's in the Board of Registrars, and so the Board of Registrars will have to talk about some of the early voting things, but I will touch on a few things. And it's important for citizens to know this, a shortened request period. It shortens the period to request a ballot by 109 days. And that's in line 927 through 929. It also shortens ballot request deadline to 11 days before the election, a full 5 days earlier than counties had supported. So now you will have 11 days before the election that you can request, whereas it used to be you can request a ballot up until that Friday before the election. Now you have to do it 11 days prior. It shortens the runoff period. Lines 2238 shortens the runoff period from 9 weeks to 4 weeks and 28 days. This will also likely have trouble and have an issue with vote by mail options for runoff elections, because it doesn't give enough time to create a ballot, send it out, and allow citizens to send it back in. And so you're going to have a lot of citizens, unfortunately, who may not know this, will say, well, I want to send in a ballot instead of going in person for the runoff. Well, now they have to either, and that's going to come on us again, that's going to impact us, because it is now shortened from 9 weeks to 4 weeks and 28 days. Also, line 2238 of the bill prevents newly eligible voters from voting in runoff elections, given registration deadline in Georgia is 29 days before an election now. So it would be impossible for new voters who register to vote for a runoff to actually vote in that runoff. Here's another important one. Lines 430 through lines 435 bans Board of Elections from accepting private grant money from any reason, for any reason, including to open more polling locations, pay poll workers, and add equipment, etc. The next one is lines 866 through 868. Allows counties to have fewer than one voting machine for every 250 voters in non-general elections. What this simply means is, under the old law, no matter whether it was a primary, a runoff, or a general, we were required to have at least one machine, one ballot marketing device per 250 registered voters, per 250 voters assigned to a poll. For example, if, and y'all gonna have to help me with the math here, so somebody get a calculator out. If a polling location such as one of our largest polls, Coastal Cathedral, if they have 3,000 registered voters assigned to them, we had to have, if you divide 250 by 3,000, that many number of ballot marketing devices per that 250. Right now, in a non-general election such as a primary or a runoff, we do not have to have that. Now, this is one of those rare moments where I'm going to make a personal statement of, that is a difficult thing that for me to support. We're going to have to follow it, but it's going to be difficult because when you have 3,000 voters, you really don't know how many people are going to turn out in a runoff, such as we had in January. You don't know how many people are not going to turn out. So we're going to have to do some very good calculating as to how many voting machines are going to be at a poll such as Coastal Cathedral during a runoff or a primary, because we're now not required to have that minimum amount, that minimum number of voting machines. We can literally just have 5 or 6. It gives the discretion to the Board of Elections. And so that is something I'm going to be fighting for, is making sure that we still have adequate number of voting machines at our polling locations, no matter what election we're covering and we're executing. Now, shortly, Senate Bill 202 will allow early tabulation. It will allow early tabulation of votes. This is important because of our new deadline. We have to have these tabulated by that 5 p.m. the next day. So we can start tabulating early on. Also, it ends signature matching. There's a discrepancy with signature matching because signatures change. People have difficulties with signatures, so it ends signature matching. And it adds one Saturday early voting day. So now we can do, I think it's 2 Saturdays now of early voting. And it allows people in adjoining counties to be poll workers. This is my last point. Individuals who have wanted to be poll workers, who may have lived in a different county, can now become a poll worker here in Chatham County if they live in Bryan County, if they live in Richmond County, things of that nature. Right now, we do not have a shortage of poll workers. We, in fact, have a long list of almost 1,000 names of people from previous elections, such as the runoff and the last general election, that has graciously volunteered and want to be poll workers. So thank you to all of our citizens who are willing to step up and be poll workers. But also know that if you live in a different county, you now can work in Chatham County. But it also means that our poll workers here in Chatham County that would like to go help out in Bryan or Effingham can go work in those counties as well. That also helps a little bit economically too, if a citizen feels like they have, you know, they don't want to drive as far. And so that currently, I'll take some questions now, that currently are some of the major keys that will impact our citizens here in Chatham County, and I'll take any questions.
Have you all talked about that? Where are you with that?
There are discussions amongst some of my colleagues and I, and and staff, that will hopefully manifest what you're talking about. One of the things I will be pushing for is for us to offer that water and or snacks to our citizens. It's absolutely important to note that we have citizens who have diabetes, we have citizens who have health issues, and I don't think that them being in line for 4 hours without having a snack or something to help them is, number one, humane, but number two, something that I can in good conscience support. And so I will be pushing for our board to continuously move forward in that vein, whether accepting donations of water from citizens, which I'm not sure if the bill will allow us to do that, because it says that we can't accept grants in terms of monetary donations, but it doesn't prohibit, in terms of what I see and what I've been able to dissect, it doesn't prohibit us from accepting donations from organizations such as the League of Women Voters, or any other organization that wants to donate water and food. Otherwise, we would have to pay out of our budget in order to do that.
And I know you also talked about how Chatham County is unique with having the Board of Elections and Board of Registrars separate. Could you see the state coming in and wanting to change that, merge that?
Well, I think personally, and you can quote me on the record here, I think the bill was really targeted towards Fulton County. I think it was something that many lawmakers wanted to really look at Fulton County as the target county for many of these provisions, for their reasons. But I will say that it's going to be, I don't see where they want to come in and take over Chatham County. We've done a very good job at what we do. We follow the law, and that's ultimately what we're going to do. That's exactly why I wanted to do this press conference, because it's not about whether or not the law is right or wrong at this point. It's about making sure citizens understand that the law is the law now, and we've got to now educate citizens on the new guidelines that they have to follow and that we have to follow as a board. And so following the letter of the law now is important to limit the opportunity of the state elections board to come in and even want to look at our board and look at what we're doing. And so it's important for us to educate our citizens so that they know, and it's important to educate us to make sure that we understand what guidelines we have to put in place now and what policies we have to put in place to follow that.
And I know early voting is Board of Registrars, so if you can't answer this, please just tell me. But
Sure.
With the absentee ballot boxes, the blue boxes having to come inside, only being available during business hours, what are your thoughts about that? Do you think that could deter some people away from dropping off their ballot? The Board of Elections is open from 8 to 5 and you work until 5 and can't get here, then what is that going to do for some voters?
I'm always careful about making my opinion on matters of the Board of Registrars, but I will say as a voter and as a elected official, I think it will make some challenges for a lot of our citizens. The challenge of not having equal access to a ballot box to drop it off through mail, it was absolutely crucial in our last election in January and in November. It was absolutely crucial to have access to a ballot box where you can just go in and not even get out of your car. You can just drop it off, really. But you have to get out of your car in many instances because it's a pull down, not a drop through. But at the same token, it's important to understand that I think that is a reprehensive part of this bill that that ultimately will hit us and it will hurt us. But ultimately what it will do, it will cause longer lines at the polling places on in-person day of voting. I think ultimately that's the result we're going to see, and that's why we have to be prepared for that influx of voting. The last year was an anomaly. It was a pandemic. We had movement. We had a lot of excitement on the ballot in terms of races, but we can't just allow those elements to dictate whether or not we're going to say, oh, well, this is a slower year, so we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. I think we still have to be prepared for it. And so moving forward, I think I'm going to continue to advocate on the board to continue to make voting access better and more equal and more fair.
I think it's important, obviously, to reiterate that this this press conference isn't political.
Right.
There's obviously a lot to unpack with this bill, and you know, in all fairness, you had mentioned a couple of things about, you know, some of these provisions not necessarily being bad, and we know that there's been a lot of boycotts. Again, a very politicized issue. Can you kind of touch again on some of these things that may not be all bad going forward into an election?
Yeah, I think it's clear that there are some of these provisions in this bill that actually are very bad for citizens. But there are some provisions in this bill that actually helps us as election officials. For example, I use, for example, the early tabulation. Us being able to start tabulating these votes a little earlier so that we can get the numbers out a lot quicker. Ending signature matching is another one. And adding an extra Saturday of early voting is important. Also allowing people from other counties to come in and help us if we need it. Those are provisions that help us. And I know that, you know, some people will automatically say that the entire bill is bad. But there are provisions in the ballot, in the bill that, let's face it, it limits voting for a lot of our citizens. But there are some provisions that do help us with elections and in administering the election.
My other question for you is, when you talked about how people from other counties can come in and help out Chatham County, vice versa, why would people want to go work in a county if they don't live in it?
Well, I mean, we have to look at another issue of time, how long voting is. I mean, there are some provisions I didn't even touch in terms of the flexibility now of us having a poll open. For example, our staff can say our polls, well, we can vote to say our polls are going to be open from 9 to 5 or 9 to 7. You know, that hurts the average person who's working. But Bryan County can say, oh, well, we're going to have it from this time to this time. It works better for their work schedule. So it does open the opportunity for them to be able to have the flexibility to work in another area.
And do you have any concerns about not having enough people in Chatham County? I know you said you have a very long list, so chances are you'll still have enough people.
From my staff's perspective, we are always looking for more workers. We're always looking for, again, we're looking for more polls, more polling locations, just to help us cover the bases. We have a very fast-growing population here, especially out in the Pooler area, Port Wentworth area. We see the development happening, especially with the new developments of apartment complexes that we have to calculate into our population. And as a board, we have to also calculate that into our boundaries. And so when enough people get in those precincts, we've got to look at how to redraw these precincts again. So that's important too. But yes, to answer your question, I think it's a decent thing to allow people to work in a different county. Now, where we have to maintain integrity and maintain the legality, we have to make sure that those citizens are still citizens. So there is still a process that those individuals in a different county will have to go through in order to still work. You know, you still got to be a citizen of the United States. You still got to, have that type of legality covered. So, yeah.
And you had mentioned how this last election was an anomaly. We had a lot of COVID restrictions. Now, there's no really telling if the next election will, still be within a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think some of these restrictions seem worse because they're being viewed through the lens of the pandemic, which obviously made elections a lot harder?
I think, in trying not to politicize this, I think when we look at what happened during the pandemic, we had a stronger push for more progressive rules and laws that allowed for more people to have more access to the ballot, ultimately. I think because of that, we saw an influx of voter participation. And when you see an influx of voter participation, as a politician, you're looking at it as, well, where's the influx? Is it my party or is it the other party? And I think what we did see is that there was an influx of voters, not just in the Democratic Party, but also in the Republican Party. Now, I will also say that these laws that are impacting us as citizens are also impacting everyone, not just Democrats, not just Republicans, and not just independents. Everyone is being impacted. I think we are yet to see the results of these impacted laws, especially not until 2022, when we're going to have a much more influx of voters and participation in a much larger election, such as the gubernatorial, and we're going to have a senatorial race on that ballot. This year, we're looking at probably just having a referendum on the ballot, the East Bloc referendum. And so that may not be as big of a test of these new laws. But we do need to be prepared, because I don't think the law is going to change. And again, that's why I wanted to do this press conference, because it's about education. It's about making sure that citizens are aware of what's coming down the road. I'm sure we're going to do some more educational opportunities in the future, but I wanted to make sure that we make these initial attempts to make sure citizens understand this is the law. And as much as we may want to change some of these provisions, they're here to stay. And we're going to have to make sure that we abide by them, and we make sure that you as citizens understand what's coming down the pipe.
And my last question is just,
Sure.
and correct me if I'm wrong, have you touched on the voter ID requirement?
It's actually in here.
Okay, because I know that, again, was another hot button issue when it came to some of these restrictions. If you could elaborate, possibly.
I will tell you where you can look for it. Lines 951 through 954 in the bill, it adds new voter ID requirements to the application, whereas I believe now you're going to have a copy of your ID to accompany it. And I don't think you have to have two separate copies. You just need to have a copy of your ID. Now, if you don't have an ID, it's going to be very difficult for you to cast a ballot, ultimately. And I think that what would have helped is expanding the voting IDs to not just what we have currently, where it's driver's license and things like that, but even with our veterans, allowing them to use their veterans retired card, their ID card, which has their name, has their date, has all of that information on it, and allow them to use that. That would be a provision that would help with access to the ballot. It's not in here, but it would help. Also, line 1466 through 1468 adds new ID requirements. If no driver's license or state ID or social security number, can't use those. So if you don't have those, there are other IDs that you can use. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's nice of somebody to join us. Just kidding.
We didn't know about it.
Oh, man, you didn't? I'm going to have to make... Guys.
Believe it or not, not all of us have each other's numbers.
Oh, man. All
I'll
right.
get you after this.
Thank you. All right. Is there anything else, guys? If there's not, then we're good.
Thank you so much.
Definitely.